Good afternoon and thanks for joining. It's a new day and another chance to get things going your way. On today's show, we'll be discussing the Real House of Atlanta physical confrontation between stars Portia Stewart and Kenya Moore, which demonstrated a bullying target's limits after being chastised a bit too long. After that, we have Underground Railroad's master quilter Sharon Tyndall. Then we'll have our quote of the day. So starting with our discussion on the Real House of Atlanta, that was an incredible situation in which two stars entered into a physical confrontation just because one didn't understand when to take a break. Anytime anyone enters into a physical confrontation, it's never acceptable. And it's never acceptable to use physical violence to resolve any conflicts. The Real Housewives of Atlanta incident between these two stars, Portia Stewart and Kenya Moore, demonstrated the effect of workplace bullying and the potential negative impacts of letting it go unresolved. So let's start with some of the discussion points or some details from the incident. Well, first, we've got to realize that bullying can be a single or it can be multiple incidents. So a lot of times folks believe that bullying has to do with multiple incidents that occur over a period of time. Well, no, there can be one incident that is just so egregious that bullying can occur just in that one incident alone. The other thing is that I've heard a lot of folks say is that bullying is about someone being weaker. And bullying is not necessarily about someone being weaker than another. It's more about an individual using their power, influence, and control to harass, intimidate, and threaten another. And that's exactly what Kenya Moore did in this particular incident on the Real Housewives of Atlanta reunion. Also, when we look at the actions of Kenya Moore, we see that she used a lot of props and other situations to provoke not just Portia, but she had also provoked others on the show at various points. So what actually transpired on the reunion show was that Kenya actually pushed things to the limit when she started pointing a scepter towards Portia during discussions and then later using a bullhorn to speak to Portia, who was just a few feet away. And given their past history, and I'm not condoning the actions that Portia took, but given their past history and then the ongoing escalation of the tactics that Kenya was using, Portia had just had enough at that point. And unfortunately, the two eventually entered into each other's space until Portia started feeling pushed just a little bit too far, and her anxieties or stress of the situation got to her, and then she began to pull at Kenya Moore's hair, and then unfortunately both of them ended up falling to the floor, and it was an embarrassing situation for all of the parties involved. And you know, it's important for me to stop and say that violence is never the answer to resolve an issue or a situation, and it's unfortunate that that these two stars had to end up at this particular place in their confrontation. So what were some of the key issues that happened? Well, Portia and Kenya had a history of escalating conflict. So that was a potential warning sign that things were happening. And then as the taunting continued by Kenya on the show, there was clearly an escalation on Portia's part in terms of her reaction to the situation. So one of the first signs that something was really, really bothering Portia is when she grabbed the scepter out of Kenya's hand and then threw it aggressively on the floor. That should have been a clear sign to those that were watching and observing this to say, you know, something is probably not right here, and maybe we should take some actions to sort of cool off the situation. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And then as we continue to watch the situation continue to escalate, immediate action should have been taken to reduce the conflict from further escalation. But again, no one took action to resolve anything, including the leader of the situation, Andy Cohen, who didn't demonstrate any leadership at all by trying to defuse the situation, protect the resources that were involved, or try to do anything to resolve the situation prior to it getting out of control. And that's the unfortunate part of this, is that there were multiple opportunities to prevent this particular issue to be resolved prior to, or if not resolved completely, at least to allow things to calm down a little bit by taking time, distance, space, whatever, to prevent this particular issue from escalating too far. So what are some of the lessons that we can take away from this particular incident? Well, first and foremost, there should be an attempt to resolve conflicts between the parties as quickly as possible. Sometimes when things are starting to escalate and getting out of control, sometimes the best thing to do, instead of continuing the discussion, is to just take a time out, take a pause, walk away, and allow yourself to collect yourself, reduce the stress of the situation, and then come back to the situation a little bit later when it's a little bit cooler, and so that folks aren't continuing to escalate the situation. The other thing is when outside observers are in a situation, they can also be part of the resolution process by trying to take action to reduce the escalation before it gets to a place where there's a violent confrontation. And if it's safe to do so, get involved. We don't want anybody else to get hurt by a particular incident that's escalating out of control, but to the extent possible, we've got to take corrective action as quickly as possible to prevent things from continuing to escalate and spiral out of control. Also, we need to make sure that efforts should be made to separate these individuals via time and distance and to assist in the resolution of any conflict at the time the conflict is not at a heightened state. So again, separating by time, distance, space, and then allowing individuals to cool off and then coming back and then having discussions later when folks aren't as angry or as heightened by the situation. And then don't wait until the situation has erupted to take action. We've got to take action early in the process to prevent individuals from getting to that point where they do something that they regret. And then one of the most important things in any type of bullying situation, especially when leaders are involved, is that the leaders must take ownership of the situation. They have to demonstrate leadership by making sure that the resources that are under their purview are not continuing to escalate the situation, taking action to diffuse the anger, the animosity, or anything else to resolve the issue at hand. But most importantly, a leader must take action to protect its resources long before a conflict knowingly escalates. But those are just some of my thoughts on the Real Housewives of Atlanta, because we're seeing a lot of topics in the news, in the media today about ongoing bullying incidents. But a lot of times bullying incidents can be resolved long before they get to a point where they get out of control by taking action early on in the process to make sure that individuals are aware of any type of issues or behavior or actions that are inappropriate and dealing with them as soon as possible to prevent anyone from getting into a uncomfortable, unwanted, or unprovoked situation. So after the break, we're going to continue on with our discussion. Today, we're going to have our guest on